The scuff of Leo's shoes marked his daily escape from school, a predictable cadence of freedom. Today, however, that familiar rhythm was swallowed by a deeper vibration, a throbbing pulse that climbed from the asphalt, up through his sneakers, and settled in his chest. He rounded the corner of the brick building, his bright yellow backpack bouncing with each stride, and froze. A line of motorcycles, their engines ticking quietly as they cooled, shimmered like obsidian beasts along the curb. They were immense, almost impossibly so, handlebars spearing towards the sky, exhaust pipes thick as Leo's forearms. And the riders. They were just as formidable. Dark, weight-eye leather vests, embellished with patches Leo couldn't decipher from his distance, stretched across formidable shoulders. Tattoos coiled up arms, intricate as ancient vines, vanishing beneath sleeves or into the shadowed contours of their beards. They stood in a loose circle, their voices a low, gravelly current, like river stones churning. Leo, a second grader, with a sandy mop of hair and an observant gaze, felt a prickle of unease. His usual route home, past the swings and the ancient oak, was now an imposing gauntlet. Most kids, he knew, would detour or pretend not to notice. But Leo wrestled with a problem, a big, surly problem named Mr. Grumbles. And something about these men, their rugged mien, the sheer power emanating from their machines, ignited a small, daring idea in his mind. He watched them for a long moment, gripping his backpack strap until his knuckles blanched. One man, the largest among them, with a beard like spun silver and a bandana cinched around his head, leaned against a particularly magnificent bike, its chrome glinting in the afternoon sun. This man, Leo decided, was the chieftain. His face, a landscape of lines and shadows, held eyes that, even from afar, seemed to miss nothing. A nervous gulp caught in Leo's throat. His teacher, Mr. Grumbles, was, to put it mildly, unpleasant. He yelled, he scowled, and he possessed a knack for dimming even the brightest day. But the most peculiar thing about Mr. Grumbles was his jacket. It was black, just like these men's, and on its thick leather back, a patch. A patch that looked strikingly similar to the ones Leo now glimpsed. Mr. Grumbles, with a sneer, had told the class just yesterday that he was part of the club. He delivered it with a menacing chuckle, cautioning them to be extra good if they valued their hides. Leo's small heart hammered against his ribs. It felt wrong. Everything about Mr. Grumbles felt wrong, especially when he spoke of his club, with that glint in his eye. These men, they looked authentic. And if Mr. Grumbles was lying, it was a colossal fabrication indeed. A lie that these men, with their serious expressions and potent bikes, ought to expose. Taking a deep breath, Leo began to walk. Each step felt leaden, as if his sneakers were weighted. He kept his gaze fixed on the big man, the one with the silver beard, trying to ignore the way the other's eyes seemed to drift his way as he approached. He could feel their scrutiny, a prickling sensation on his neck. They had been talking amongst themselves, their voices a low rumble, but then, as Leo drew nearer, they hushed. A profound silence descended upon the group, broken only by the distant squeal of a school bus. He stopped a few feet away, his stomach doing acrobatics. The man, Rex, as Leo would eventually learn, straightened, his eyes, surprisingly, not unkind but sharp and appraising, the color of a gathering storm. "Can we help you, kid?" Rex's voice was deep, a low hum that vibrated in Leo's teeth. Leo's tongue felt thick. He looked down at his shoes, then up at Rex's stern face. He had to be brave. Mr. Grumbles was important. This felt important. He took another step forward, closing the small gap between them. The mingled scents of leather, gasoline, and something vaguely metallic, like oil, filled his nostrils. He extended a small, trembling hand and, with a surge of courage he hadn't known he possessed, tugged gently on the hem of Rex's leather vest. The leather was unexpectedly soft, not coarse as he'd imagined. Rex looked down, a single eyebrow arching slightly. The other men watched, their faces unreadable. Leo felt every eye on him, every unspoken question. I have to tell you something, Leo whispered, his voice barely a breath. He was acutely aware of his diminutiveness, his insignificance beside these towering figures. Rex knelt slowly until his eyes were nearly level with Leo's. The air around him seemed to crackle with an unspoken intensity. "What is it, son?" His voice was softer this time, a gentle rumble that was less intimidating. Leo leaned in, his mouth close to Rex's ear, the words tumbling out in a rush, a secret too heavy to bear alone. "My teacher," he breathed. "Mr. Grumbles. He has your jacket." He pulled back slightly, his eyes wide and earnest, searching Rex's face for understanding. "He wears it, and he tells everyone. He tells us he's in your club." A ripple went through the group of men. Leo heard a low murmur, a sharp intake of breath from one of them. Rex's face, which had been merely curious, hardened. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, narrowed slightly, and a flicker of something Leo couldn't quite name. Suspicion? Anger? Crossed them. But his gaze remained fixed on Leo, steady and unwavering. The ensuing silence was heavy, pregnant with unspoken questions. Leo knew, instinctively, that he had just set something monumental into motion. A puzzling secret Rex's brow, a topography of weathered lines and old scars, creased in a way Leo had never witnessed. It wasn't the familiar thundercloud of Mr. Grumbles' rage, but a nuanced shift, a blend of astonishment and a slow kindling suspicion. His gaze, typically unwavering, flickered to the surrounding men, conveying a silent, almost imperceptible directive. A few of the bikers, whose interest had ranged from amusement to apathy, now subtly angled forward, their expressions mirroring Rex's. A low thrum, like distant thunder preceding a downpour, rippled through the small assembly. "Mr. Grumbles, you say?" Rex's voice deepened, a gravelly whisper that nonetheless commanded attention. "And he sports a patch, like ours?" He gestured vaguely to the intricate embroidery on his own vest. The iconic emblem of a winged skull, clutched in a fiery hand. Leo bobbed his chin, his small throat working. The initial surge of bravery receded, leaving a tremor in his knees. He tightened his grip on his backpack strap, the plastic lunchbox a hard press against his ribs. "Yes, sir. It's identical. He usually keeps it under his jacket, but I saw it when he leaned over to help Timmy with his reading. It has the wings and the fire, just like yours." He pointed a small, precise finger at the detail on Rex's vest, his memory sharp despite his fear. A man with a silver goatee and an earring shaped like a tiny crow skull, mid-polish on a chrome fender, froze his rag. "A teacher," he scoffed, the sound rough. "Wearing our colors?" His eyes narrowed, dissecting Leo's guileless face as if searching for a hidden jest. Rex raised a hand, silencing the man. His focus returned to Leo, piercing and steady. "What's this teacher's full name, son? And what exactly does he tell you about us?" Leo swallowed hard. The questions felt like a crucible, and he yearned to prove himself. "His name is Mr. Grumbles. Just Mr. Grumbles." He says he's a super tough Hell's Angel. He told us that if we don't do our homework, he'll tell his biker friends, and they'll come to our houses." Leo's voice dwindled to a near inaudible whisper on the last words, the old dread momentarily eclipsing the fresh anxiety. He recalled the cold knot in his stomach each time Mr. Grumbles had issued the threat, the chilling images of burly men on roaring motorcycles appearing outside his bedroom window. The air around the bikers seemed to coalesce, a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The easy camaraderie that had filled the space moments before evaporated, replaced by a charged stillness. Rex's jaw clenched, a muscle visibly tightening beneath his tanned skin. He exchanged another look with his companions. This time, the anger simmering beneath the surface was unmistakable. It was a slow, deliberate anger, not an explosive burst, but something far more potent. The quiet fury of challenged pride, of trust betrayed. "A super tough Hell's Angel," Rex repeated, the words rolling off his tongue with a dangerous precision. His voice remained level, yet the tone was colder, sharper than anything Leo had heard from him thus far. "And he claims to be a part of our club, does he?" Leo nodded vigorously, relieved that Rex appeared to credit his story. "Yes, he says he rides a really big motorcycle, but I've never seen it. He just drives his old car to school." He almost blurted out that Mr. Grumbles' vehicle was a rusty blue sedan that perpetually smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation, but thought better of it. The specific details of Mr. Grumbles' car felt less significant than the monumental secret Leo had just divulged. Rex stroked his chin, his gaze distant, as if sifting through a mental roster. The Hells Angels, Leo understood, were a tight-knit fraternity. Every member was known, every face familiar, every patch a testament to blood and loyalty. The notion of a schoolteacher, especially one named Mr. Grumbles, masquerading as one of them, was not just absurd, it was a profound insult. It was a lie that tarnished their reputation, a deceit that cheapened their hard-won identity. "You're sure about this, son?" Rex asked again, his eyes boring into Leo's, probing for any trace of doubt or fabrication. There was a gravity in his voice that transcended mere questioning. It was an appeal for the absolute truth, a demand for certainty before a course was set, a line irrevocably crossed. Leo met his gaze, his small frame unwavering despite the tremor in his hands. "Yes, sir," he affirmed, his voice surprisingly firm. "I wouldn't lie about something like this. He makes everyone scared. He makes me scared." The final admission burst forth, a raw, honest confession that cleaved the tension. He wasn't merely a messenger. He was a victim, seeking sanctuary. The admission seemed to solidify something within Rex. His expression hardened, the last vestiges of surprise yielding to a grim determination. The silent signals exchanged between him and his men shifted, becoming clearer, more urgent. No more casual leaning, no more idle polishing. Every eye was now riveted on Rex, awaiting his command. The air thrummed with unspoken intent, a silent accord forming among the leather-clad men. The small boy's story, a tale of a deceptive teacher and a stolen identity, had unwittingly ignited a fuse, setting in motion events far grander and more perilous than Leo could possibly imagine. Rex finally nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "All right, Leo," he said, his voice now devoid of any lingering doubt. "Thank you for telling us. This, Mr. Grumbles, sounds like he's got a lot to explain." The finality in Rex's voice was absolute. Leo felt a strange blend of relief and a fresh wave of apprehension. He had played his part. Now, the formidable men before him would play theirs. Suspicion takes hold. A guttural growl, like distant thunder on a thirsty plain, snaked through the assembled Hell's Angels. Rex, his face a granite mask of simmering rage, surveyed his men. Their mirrored expressions shifted from disbelief to a cold, hard fury. Silence stretched, broken only by the city's distant hum and the sporadic clink of a chain against leather. Finally, Knuckles, a burly biker whose beard was a testament to meticulous braiding, shattered the quiet. "A teacher," his voice rasped, thick with incredulity, "wearing our colors, threatening kids with our name." He spat the words like venom. A ripple of agreement spread. Initial shock had receded, replaced by a surging tide of indignation. Leo's earnest, almost childlike account had struck a profoundly dissonant chord, a sour note in the meticulously orchestrated symphony of their brotherhood. Rex ran a hand through his thinning hair, a furrow deepening in his brow. "He ain't one of us," he stated, his voice a low thrum of absolute authority. "No teacher, no matter how tough he imagines himself, belongs to this club. We know every brother who's earned his patch, every last one." Affirmations echoed. The Hell's Angels were more than a mere club. They were a lineage forged in loyalty and shared crucible. An outsider, particularly a schoolteacher, flaunting their identity was an unpardonable transgression, a desecration of their very foundation. "So, what's the play, Rex?" Spider, lean and wiry with eyes that missed nothing, inquired. His hand instinctively found the hilt of his sheathed knife. The air around them crackled with barely suppressed energy. Rex's gaze swept over his men, acknowledging the restless pulse that vibrated through them. He understood the impulse for swift, brutal reprisal, but years of leadership had honed his appreciation for calculated action. "We don't rush in," he declared, his voice unwavering. "Not yet. We don't know this man. We don't know his angle." "His angle is disrespecting us," growled Viper, a younger patch holder still flushed with youthful zeal. "And we'll deal with that," Rex assured him, his tone leaving no room for argument. "But we do it smart. This kid, Leo, he came to us. He trusted us. We owe him more than a blind charge." He paused, letting his words settle. "First, we uncover who this Mr. Grumbles truly is. What kind of man appropriates colors he hasn't earned? What kind of man wields our name to terrorize school children?" A flicker of cold calculation entered Rex's eyes. The gravity of the situation was crystallizing. This extended beyond a pilfered vest or empty boasts. It touched the sacred integrity of their identity, the hard-won reputation that preceded them. To have that reputation sullied, twisted into a teacher's petty instrument of intimidation, was an affront demanding a meticulous response. "So, surveillance?" Knuckles suggested, rubbing his chin. Rex nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, after school. We'll locate this Mr. Grumbles. Observe his movements, his actions, his contacts. We need to ascertain if this is merely some fool's delusion or something more." Orchestrated. The notion of deliberate impersonation for nefarious ends sent a shiver down his spine. It was a violation far transcending mere theft, an attack on their very essence. The men exchanged grim nods. The hunt had begun. The casual camaraderie of earlier moments had evaporated, replaced by a sharp, focused resolve. The sun dipped lower, painting long, dramatic shadows across the pavement. Yet the bikers remained, silhouetted against the fading light, their faces etched with a shared, unyielding purpose. The insult had been delivered, and now the reckoning was imminent. Mr. Grumbles, whoever he was, stood on the precipice of a harsh lesson, about falsely claiming allegiance to the Hells Angels, and Rex, bound by his unwavering code, would ensure that lesson was indelible. The rumble of engines that would carry them away from the school hummed a promise, a foreboding symphony of steel and defiance. The quiet thrum of their idling bikes was a stark counterpoint to the storm brewing within them. Tomorrow, the calm would shatter. Watching the teacher, the westering sun cast long, contorted shadows across the asphalt playground as Rex guided his road king to a discreet vantage point, half a block from the school. Behind him, Hammer and Ghost mirrored his move, their engines a guttural rumble, before settling into a hush that magnified the distant lilt of children's laughter. From their covert position behind overgrown hedges, Hawthorne Elementary's red brick facade loomed, its windows reflecting the lowering sun like empty sockets. Rex cut his engine, the abrupt silence a heavy blanket. He shed his helmet, relishing the cool balm of the breeze on his scalp, his gaze sweeping the school grounds with an almost predatory intensity. His usually tranquil blue eyes now held a glint of steel. He wasn't here for wistful memories. He was hunting for truth. Leo's words had burrowed deep, sparking a slow, simmering indignation that threatened to erupt into an inferno if substantiated. "All right," he murmured, his voice a low grind. "Let's assess the situation." They waited. The playground gradually emptied, the youthful cacophony ceding to the quiet thrum of the neighborhood. Parents arrived in a steady stream, some on foot, others in minivans, gathering their young. Rex observed the ebb and flow of humanity, cataloging faces, noting ingrained habits. He sought one face above all others. Then, a figure emerged from the main entrance. Tall, gangly, his posture a peculiar blend of rigidity and underlying anxiety, the man moved with a deliberate, almost theatrical gait. He wore a tweed jacket, its prominent elbow patches speaking of academic affectation, and clutched a worn leather satchel. His wispy gray hair was meticulously parted. Yet it was his face that truly snared Rex's attention. A strong jawline, thin lips habitually compressed into a tight seam, and eyes that darted, suspicious and hypervigilant. This had to be him. This had to be Mr. Grumbles. Rex nudged Hammer with an elbow. "That him?" Hammer, his massive frame utterly still, offered an almost imperceptible nod. "Looks the part, Rex. The kind of fella who puffs himself up, but would likely crumble under a sharp glance." Grumbles paused on the top step, surveying the departing parents and children with an air of self-importance. He seemed to bask in the imagined spotlight, his chest expanding slightly. A flicker of disgust ran through Rex. This man, a supposed educator, was leveraging their name, their colors, to inflate his paltry ego. It was an unpardonable affront. As Grumbles descended the steps, he exchanged a few curt words with a passing parent, his voice too loud, too performative. Rex could almost discern the condescension in his tone, even from this distance. The parent, a small woman with weary eyes, nodded rapidly and steered her child away, a subtle tension in her shoulders. Grumbles watched them go, a sneer momentarily twisting his thin lips, before he smoothed his expression back into one of practiced authority. He unlocked a beat-up sedan, its paint faded and peeling, and drove off, turning in the opposite direction from their concealed position. "Well, that's day one," Ghost rumbled. "Doesn't look like much, does he?" "Appearances can deceive," Rex countered, his gaze still fixed on the empty school entrance. "He looks like a man who's been cornered before, and cornered men often turn desperate." For the subsequent days, the routine remained largely unchanged. Rex, sometimes accompanied by Hammer, sometimes by ghost or even alone, maintained a discreet vigil. They repositioned their bikes, always out of direct sight, always observing. They pieced together Grumbles' daily rhythm: arrival just before the first bell, departure shortly after the last. They witnessed his interactions with other teachers, brief, formal exchanges, rarely venturing into casual banter. He ate lunch in the staff room by himself, often engrossed in a book, never engaging with colleagues. His dealings with students, however, were far more revealing. Rex observed him in the schoolyard during recess, patrolling the perimeter with a stiff, almost militaristic stride. He barked commands, reprimanded small children for minor infractions, and frequently jabbed a finger, his face contorted in a perpetual scowl. There was no warmth, no genuine rapport, only an icy detachment and a thinly veiled hunger for control. One afternoon, Rex watched as Grumbles approached a group of boys playing tag. He didn't join in, didn't smile. Instead, he halted their game, looming over them, and delivered a harsh scolding for running too close to the school building. The boys, their faces falling, shuffled their feet and exchanged nervous glances. Grumbles then straightened his jacket, adjusted his tie, and stalked off, leaving a palpable chill in his wake. Rex's jaw tightened. He pictured Leo, a small child, enduring this man's intimidation day after day. The thought curdled in his gut. This wasn't merely about a pilfered patch or a spurious claim. It was about the abuse of power, about preying on the vulnerable. On the third day, as the final bell chimed, Rex saw it. Grumbles emerged from the school, not in his usual tweed, but in a heavy black leather vest. On the back, crudely stitched, was a familiar winged skull. It was a cheap facsimile, poorly rendered, but undeniably a Hell's Angel's death head. He wore it like a battle standard, shoulders back, chin jutted out, a sneer playing on his lips as he surveyed the departing children. He walked with a swagger, a performance staged for an audience of impressionable kids who knew no better. A cold, hard knot formed in Rex's stomach. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated, deliberate act of deception and desecration. Leo's story wasn't just true. It was an understatement. Rex reached for his phone, his fingers already dialing. "Ghost, Hammer," he barked into the receiver, his voice taut with suppressed fury. "Get ready. We've seen enough." The stolen colors. The late afternoon sun, now a muted orange, cast long, distorted shadows across the Hawthorne Elementary parking lot. Rex, Hammer, and Ghost remained tucked away in the perimeter, their motorcycles a silent, steel-framed backdrop to the mundane ballet of parent pickups and dismissal chaos. The last bell had rung an hour ago, yet a trickle of stragglers still emerged, clutching backpacks in the hands of weary adults. "There he is," Hammer grunted, his voice a low rumble. Rex's gaze, already honed, sharpened on the figure emerging from the main entrance. It was Grumbles, unmistakable even from a distance. The man moved with a peculiar blend of feigned swagger and nervous energy, his shoulders perpetually hunched, as if bracing for a blow that never quite landed. He paused at the top of the short flight of stairs, scanning the remaining cars, a sneer playing on his lips as he dismissed a parent trying to catch his eye. Grumbles then reached for a coat rack just inside the open door, pulling a dark garment free. A cold knot began to tighten in Rex's gut. The jacket. It was a classic cut, heavy black leather, the kind that whispered of open roads and endless miles. But it wasn't just the style that caught Rex's attention. It was the way it hung, the very silhouette. It was their silhouette. As Grumbles shrugged it on, the leather creaked in protest, settling over his slight frame like an ill-fitting shroud. The man adjusted the collar, puffed out his chest, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of genuine confidence, albeit borrowed, crossed his face. Then he turned, heading towards a modest sedan parked several rows away. The movement, however slight, was enough. The afternoon light, catching the angle just right, illuminated the back of the jacket. A collective gasp, almost imperceptible, escaped the three men. There, emblazoned across the back, was the unmistakable death head, meticulously stitched in vibrant red and white. It wasn't a casual imitation, a cheap knockoff from a souvenir stand. This was a patch that spoke of lineage, of battles won and blood spilled, a symbol earned through loyalty and sacrifice. Below it, the rocker patch curved, proclaiming Hell's Angels, and beneath that, Oakland. The very colors, the specific font, the subtle irregularities that marked it as authentic, it was all there. A perfect, albeit stolen replica of their most sacred emblem. Rex felt a tremor run through him, a primal surge of fury that threatened to boil over. It wasn't the slow burn he usually cultivated, the methodical anger that fueled his decisions. This was raw, immediate, a searing indignation that bleached the colors from the world, leaving only red. His knuckles, balled into fists, whitened against the worn leather of his own grips. Ghost let out a low, guttural growl, his hand instinctively reaching for the hunting knife sheathed at his side, his eyes fixed on the retreating figure of Grumbles. "He's got our colors," he rasped, the words thick with disbelief and menace. "That scumbag stole our colors." Hammer's face, usually a study in stoicism, was contorted with a silent rage. His jaw was clenched so tight, the muscles in his neck stood out like cords. "The kid wasn't lying," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of an unholy oath. "The little shit actually did it." Rex didn't need to speak. The truth of Leo's bold claim, once a mere possibility, now blazed before them, undeniable and grotesque. This wasn't just a teacher telling tall tales. This was an outright act of desecration. To wear their colors, to display their sacred symbols without earning them, was an insult of the highest order, a direct challenge to everything they stood for. It was a theft of identity, a mockery of their brotherhood, and a profound act of disrespect that cut deeper than any physical blow. Grumbles, oblivious to the storm brewing in the shadows, unlocked his car door, tossed his worn briefcase onto the passenger seat, and then slid behind the wheel. As he did, the stolen colors, the proud symbol of the Hells Angels, crinkled and folded, hidden from view. But the image was seared into Rex's mind, a burning brand. He took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to rein in the tempest raging inside him. He had promised Leo. He had promised to investigate, and now the investigation was complete. The truth, stark and ugly, lay exposed. The time for surveillance was over. The time for talking, for subtlety, was past. Rex nodded, a grim, decisive motion. "All right," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet resonating with an unspoken threat. "We've seen enough." He kicked his bike to life. The roar of the engine, a defiant challenge to the quiet suburban street. Hammer and Ghost followed suit, their collective growl a promise of retribution, echoing through the fading light. The stolen colors. The thought alone was enough to fuel a righteous fury. Grumbles had no idea the hornet's nest he had disturbed, and Rex, the protector of that nest, was about to deliver a very personal sting. The ride back to the clubhouse was silent, heavy with unspoken intent. Each man was lost in his own simmering anger. The image of the imposter's jacket burned into their retinas, This wasn't just about a kid's story anymore. This was about honor, about respect, about the very soul of the club. And Mr. Grumbles, the pathetic posturing fraud, was about to learn a very hard lesson about what it meant to steal from the Hells Angels. More than just a jacket. The late afternoon sun stretched long, contorted shadows across the asphalt playground, painting the scene in brushstrokes of orange and gray. From their hidden perch behind the tinted windows of Rex's custom van, the three Hells Angels observed Mr. Grumbles. He stood by the school's side entrance, a caricature of false authority, his purloined vest strained across his meager frame as he gesticulated wildly at a small cluster of children. "You, Miller, the whiteboard isn't sparkling, is it? And Anderson, those desks won't wipe themselves down, will they?" Grumbles' voice, thin and reedy, pierced faintly even through the closed windows, a stark dissonance to the resonant pronouncements Rex expected from men who truly commanded deference. "My club. We don't tolerate sloppiness, and neither do I. Now get back in there. 5 minutes, then you can go home." Two boys, shoulders hunched, shuffled back inside. A pigtailed girl, her backpack a disproportionate burden on her small back, lingered, casting anxious glances at the teacher. Grumbles snared her eye. "Something amiss, Miss Daisy," he sneered, inflating his chest. "Don't tell me you've forgotten what I told you about Hell's Angels. We don't like whiners." The girl recoiled, eyes wide with apprehension. She shook her head briskly, then darted inside, nearly stumbling over her own feet. Rex's jaw hardened. Hammer's knuckles gleamed white on the steering wheel, and Ghost, usually impassive, had a muscle visibly ticking in his cheek. This transcended a mere stolen vest. This was about a predator in plain sight wielding their cherished identity as a weapon against the innocent. "He's not just wearing the jacket," Hammer growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "He's using it. Using us." Ghost's slow nod affirmed the sentiment. "Intimidation. Against kids." His gaze, typically composed, now held a cold, kindled fury. Minutes later, the children reappeared, looking even more subdued. They hurried past Grumbles, avoiding his gaze, their usual laughter conspicuously absent. They melted into the outgoing stream of students, a silent testament to the fear he instilled. Rex watched them depart, his mind a whirlwind. He spotted Leo among them, walking with a boy named Sam and a girl with vibrant red hair. Leo's characteristic animated chatter was muted, his eyes flicking towards Grumbles, then quickly away. "He said," Leo whispered to Sam, his voice barely audible above the general din of dismissal, "that if we don't do exactly what he says, his brothers will come and deal with us, like a patch-over. He said they'd take our bikes, even our skateboards." Sam, a stockier boy with freckles, scuffed at a loose stone. "Yeah, he told me about a guy who didn't do his homework. Said the angels visited his house." Sounded scary. The red-haired girl, Chloe, shivered. "He told us they break fingers if you don't listen, and that his tattoo means he's super tough. I saw it. It looked really mean." She glanced back at the school, where Grumbles now preened, checking his reflection in a classroom window. "He talks about fights and how strong he is. It makes me feel nervous, especially when he stares." Leo clutched his backpack tighter. "It's why I was so scared to tell anyone. He makes it sound like they're everywhere, watching." From the van, Rex had observed Grumble's puffed-up posture, the way he subtly attempted to catch the eyes of passing parents, as if daring them to challenge him. He was performing, playing a role badly, yet with enough conviction to terrify small children. The whispers about broken fingers, about patchovers. That was a new, sickening layer of depravity. This wasn't merely a matter of stolen property. It was a perversion of their principles, twisted into a tool of petty tyranny. "He's not just an imposter," Rex stated, the words heavy with a new, colder resolve. "He's a bully, using our colors, our reputation, to scare kids into cleaning his classroom." The implication lingered. If he was doing this with chores, what else might he be doing under the guise of their name? Hammer's fist softly impacted the dashboard. "That ain't just disrespect. That's an insult to everything we are, to our code. We don't scare children. We don't intimidate the weak." Ghost's voice when he spoke was a low growl. "He's got another thing coming. He thinks he's a big bad biker. We're gonna show him what a real one looks like." The primal rage that had simmered in Rex since Leo's initial revelation now boiled over into something more focused, more dangerous. It was no longer solely about the sacred death head or the stolen vest. It was about justice for the frightened children, for the reputation of a brotherhood that, despite its tough exterior, adhered to a strict, if unwritten, code of honor. Mr. Grumbles wasn't just a thief. He was a desecrator, a manipulator, and a coward. And Rex knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that cowardice was the one thing the Hells Angels could never tolerate. Planning the confrontation. The rumble of their Harleys receded, replaced by the low thrum of anger in Rex's chest. They'd pulled into a secluded corner of the sprawling school parking lot. Engines cut, the silence heavy with unspoken fury. Concrete dust motes danced in the afternoon sun, reflecting the simmering resentment in their eyes. That weasel," Fang growled, raking a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Using our patch, our name, to scare kids into doing his laundry. It ain't just disrespect, Rex. It's despicable." Hammer, usually the quiet observer, nodded grimly. "Seen plenty of wannabes, plenty of posers trying to look tough, but never like this. Never preying on children, using fear as a weapon." His voice, usually a deep baritone, was edged with a dangerous tremor. Rex leaned back against the cool metal of his gas tank, his gaze fixed on the school's brick facade. The cheerful din of children's laughter drifted across the asphalt, a stark contrast to the dark cloud that had settled over their small group. The images of terrified young faces, whispering their teacher's threats, replayed in his mind. The pinched, frightened expression on that little girl's face as she described Grumbles's patch-over warning. It twisted something deep inside him. "He's not just a wannabe," Rex finally said, his voice a low growl that carried an undeniable authority. "He's a bully, a fraud, and a coward. He's taking advantage of innocence, and he's doing it draped in our colors. That ain't just stealing property. That's stealing trust, perverting what we stand for." A collective nod affirmed the sentiment. The Hells Angels had a code, an unwritten law of respect, loyalty, and standing up for your own. Grumbles had defiled every tenet, not only by impersonating them, but by using that false identity to terrorize the most vulnerable. "So, what's the play, Rex?" Fang asked, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of the knife sheathed on his belt, then dropping it, knowing this required a different kind of precision. "We can't just let this slide. Not after what we saw." "No," Rex affirmed, his jaw tight. "We don't let it slide. He needs to be exposed, and he needs to be exposed in a way that makes it clear to everyone what kind of man he truly is." Hammer kicked at a loose pebble with the toe of his boot. "He's a teacher, in a school. We can't just roll in there and..." Well, you know, the unspoken implication of a full-blown biker confrontation hung in the air, a path they knew would only bring more trouble than justice. No, we don't roll in there like a storm, Rex agreed, already formulating a strategy. That's what he'd expect, what he'd probably even spin to his advantage, painting us as the bad guys. This needs to be surgical, clean, and public. A silence descended as the weight of his words settled. Public. At a school. The implications were significant, demanding careful execution. Public how? Fang pressed, his brow furrowed in thought. During school hours? That's a circus waiting to happen. Rex shook his head slowly. No, not during classes. But when the school is still active, still full of eyes, dismissal. When the parents are arriving, when the kids are all spilling out. A flicker of understanding passed between them. Dismissal. The perfect stage. The children would be there, the very ones Grumbles had terrorized. The parents would be there, the ones whose trust he had betrayed. And the school staff would be there, the ones who had unknowingly allowed a wolf in sheep's clothing to roam their halls. He needs to be stripped of his authority, of his false bravado, in front of the very people he's tried to intimidate. Rex continued, his voice taking on a steely edge. He needs to face the consequences of wearing our patch and using our name to scare children. So, we show up, Hammer mused, beginning to see the shape of the plan. At dismissal. And then what? Then, Rex said, his gaze hardening, we introduce ourselves. Properly. We show them the real Hell's Angels. And we show them the fraud who's been using our name to bully their kids. He paused, his eyes narrowing. We bring the vest, the one he's been wearing, and we make sure everyone understands it's stolen. Every single person. The plan began to solidify, taking on a precise, almost inevitable form. It wouldn't be a rampage, but a calculated exposure. A public shaming designed to strip Grumbles of every shred of his stolen power. The rising tension, the gnawing anger, began to coalesce into a focused determination. This wasn't just about a stolen vest anymore. It was about reclaiming their honor, protecting the innocent, and making sure that no one, especially a bully like Grumbles, ever again used the Hell's Angels name to instill fear in a child. All right, Fang said, a grim smile touching his lips. Dismissal. We'll be there. And we'll make sure that teacher remembers the day he messed with the wrong club. Rex nodded, his gaze returning to the school. The clock was ticking. Tomorrow, Grumbles would face a different kind of lesson. Showdown at the school gates. The rumble started low, a distant growl that vibrated through the asphalt, then climbed in pitch as it approached the school. It was dismissal, a chaotic symphony of shrill voices, slamming locker doors, and the rhythmic squeak of sneakers on linoleum. Leo, clutching his worn backpack straps, felt a tremor in his chest that wasn't entirely from the engine noise. He'd known this day was coming, had anticipated it with a mixture of dread and a strange, thrilling hope. Out on the street, the sound escalated into a thunderous roar. Students paused, their chatter dying down, as a line of powerful motorcycles, glinting chrome catching the afternoon sun, pulled up to the curb. The air thickened with the scent of gasoline and exhaust. 3 figures dismounted, their movements deliberate and unhurried. Rex, Fang, and Hammer. Their leather vests, emblazoned with the unmistakable winged skull, were not merely clothing. They were statements. Mr. Grumbles, supervising the departure of the last few stragglers near the main entrance, had been barking instructions at a group of 3rd graders. His usual bluster, however, seemed to deflate the moment his eyes landed on the trio. The color drained from his face, leaving his pale features stark against the receding hairline. He visibly swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Rex, his gaze unwavering, strode forward, the stolen Hell's Angels cut clutched in his left hand. The leather, once an emblem of false authority, now hung limp and exposed. He stopped a few feet from Grumbles, his voice cutting through the suddenly silent schoolyard like a whip. "Mr. Grumbles," Rex boomed, his voice carrying easily over the muted hum of the cooling engines. "I believe you have something of ours." He held up the jacket, the familiar winged skull patch facing outward, for everyone to see. "Or, rather, you had something of ours, and you've been wearing it, telling these children, telling everyone, that you're one of us." Grumbles' eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape route, a sympathetic face, anything to diffuse the searing spotlight of Rex's accusation. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a ghastly pallor. He tried to speak, but only a dry croak emerged. The gathered parents, initially curious, now exchanged bewildered glances. Some of the older students, recognizing the Hell's Angels insignia, gasped softly. Leo, usually prone to shrinking into the background, felt a surge of courage. He wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Grumbles. He watched, utterly captivated, as the teacher's carefully constructed facade crumbled. "You're a fake, Grumbles," Rex continued, his voice resonating with an unshakable authority that Grumbles could only mimic. "A coward who preys on children, using our name, our colors, to make yourself feel big." He took another step forward, closing the distance. "Well, guess what? You're not big. You're small. And you're done." Grumbles' face contorted. Shame, fear, and a flash of impotent rage warred in his eyes. He spun on his heel, a desperate, animalistic urge to flee overriding any pretense of dignity. He lunged towards the side gate, his brief moment of perceived invincibility shattered. But Hammer, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks, was already there, blocking his path. Hammer merely stood, unmoving, his sheer bulk an impassable wall. Grumbles skidded to a halt, his momentum carrying him into a clumsy pirouette. He stumbled, regained his footing, and turned, his eyes now wide with genuine terror. Fang, positioned near the main entrance, ensured no other escape was possible. The schoolyard, normally a bustling thoroughfare, had become a cage. A murmur rippled through the parents. Some shielded their children's eyes, others leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding drama. Leo saw his own mother among them, her mouth agape. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was it. Grumbles' reign of intimidation was over. The man who had worn stolen colors, who had whispered threats of biker connections, was now exposed for what he truly was. A frightened, pathetic bully, stripped bare of his stolen identity. The truth revealed. The collective gasp that rippled through the schoolyard was almost audible, a stark contrast to the thrumming silence that followed Rex's declaration. Mr. Grumbles, his face a mottled canvas of red and white, stood paralyzed, the stolen cut still draped over his broad shoulders, a banner of his undoing. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and budding spring, now crackled with an unspoken tension, a fragile moment teetering on the edge of chaos. Leo, nestled safely behind his mother's legs, peered out, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. But a strange sense of vindication began to bloom in his chest. Rex, his voice cutting through the stunned quiet, addressed the assembled students and parents, his gaze sweeping over their bewildered faces. "This man he began, pointing a gloved finger at the petrified teacher. Mr. Grumbles, as he calls himself, has been parading around in our club's colors. He's been telling these children that he's a Hell's Angel, using that lie to scare them, to make himself seem like something he's not. His words, though devoid of shouted anger, carried an undeniable weight, each syllable a hammer blow against Grumbles' crumbling facade. A murmur began to rise from the crowd, a confused hum of disbelief and dawning comprehension. Mrs. Davis, the kindergarten teacher, clutched her purse tighter, her eyes wide with horror as she looked from Rex to Grumbles. Mr. Henderson, the usually unflappable math teacher, adjusted his glasses, his expression a mix of shock and utter bewilderment. "He stole this cut," Rex continued, his voice gaining a low rumble. "He's got no right to wear it, no right to claim our name. We don't tolerate bullies. We don't tolerate liars. And we sure as hell don't tolerate anyone who tries to scare kids with our reputation." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, watching as the expressions of shock morphed into something akin to outrage on many faces. Leo watched his classmates, their earlier fear of Mr. Grumbles now replaced by a raw, unadulterated confusion. He saw the girl who always sat in the front row, usually so quiet, now openly whispering to her friend. He saw the boys who had once boasted about Grumbles' toughness now looking down at their shoes, their faces flushed with embarrassment. The myth of Mr. Grumbles, the fearsome biker, was being systematically dismantled, piece by agonizing piece. Mr. Grumbles finally found his voice, a reedy, pathetic croak. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the crowd, searching for an escape, for a sympathetic face, finding neither. I was just trying to maintain order." Rex let out a short, humorless laugh. "Maintain order," he scoffed, "by telling these kids you're part of a motorcycle club known for its particular way of doing things? By making them fear you, Mr. Grumbles? That's not maintaining order. That's intimidation. That's abuse of power." Just as the tension threatened to boil over, a new figure emerged from the main school entrance, a stern-faced woman in a tailored suit. Principal Thompson, her usually composed features now etched with a mixture of anger and dismay, strode purposefully towards the unfolding scene. Her eyes, usually warm and welcoming, were now cold and sharp as they fixated on Mr. Grumbles. "What is the meaning of this, Mr. Grumbles?" she demanded, her voice resonating with an authority that dwarfed the teacher's pathetic protests. She didn't wait for an answer. "I have been hearing disturbing reports, and now this." She gestured vaguely at the Hell's Angels, then pointed directly at the stolen cut. "Mr. Grumbles, you are suspended, effective immediately, and let me assure you, there will be a full, thorough investigation into every single one of these allegations." Her gaze then shifted to Rex, a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. "And you, gentlemen, I appreciate your candor. I will need to speak with you further, but first, I need to ensure the safety and well-being of my students." Rex nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Our priority is the kids, too, ma'am. That's why we're here." The principal's words, firm and decisive, seemed to break the spell of collective paralysis. Parents began to gather their children, their faces still etched with concern, but also with a sense of relief that the truth was finally out. The intimidating shadow that Mr. Grumbles had cast over their children's school day had finally been lifted, replaced by the stark, uncomfortable light of reality. Leo, watching the principal lead a bewildered and defeated Mr. Grumbles away, felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He had spoken up, and the truth, though initially terrifying, had set everyone free. The Hell's Angels, now standing guard over the departure of the shaken students, no longer seemed quite so frightening. In fact, a strange sense of gratitude, mixed with awe, began to settle over the little boy's heart. He had been brave, and these men, in their own powerful way, had made things right. Justice and bravery engines roared to life, a deep thrum vibrating through the crisp autumn air as Rex, Hammer, and Ghost swung onto their bikes. The sharp, decisive confrontation had left an indelible mark on the schoolyard, a scene that would undoubtedly echo through the close-knit community for years. Rex settled onto his Harley, the worn leather creaking beneath him. He cast a glance back at the school, where Principal Thompson was still debriefing a cluster of shaken teachers. Mr. Grumbles, his face a roadmap of shame and impotent rage, had been escorted away, his fabricated bluster utterly deflated. A low growl of satisfaction resonated within Rex's chest. The initial drive to reclaim their desecrated identity had deepened, transforming into something more profound. They had shielded children, dismantled a bully's false authority, and restored a measure of integrity to a place that desperately needed it. "All right, boys," Rex's voice cut through the idling engines. "Mission accomplished." Hammer nodded, a grim smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Never pictured myself rescuing second graders from a wannabe tough guy." Ghost offered a curt, sharp nod, his eyes still holding a faint spark of the righteous fury that had ignited during the encounter. For a moment, the three men stood in silence, bathed in the hues of the setting sun, a tableau of justice delivered. Then, with a synchronized twist of throttles, the bike surged forward, leaving a faint exhaust scent and a lingering sense of disruption in their wake. They turned onto the main road, the powerful machines humming a low, victorious song as they vanished from sight. Inside the school, the lingering commotion gradually subsided. Leo watched their departure from the doorway of the principal's office, a small silhouette against the bright hallway. His heart, a frantic drumbeat moments earlier, now settled into a steady, triumphant rhythm. The knot of fear that had plagued his stomach for weeks finally unraveled, leaving him feeling lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. He recalled Mr. Grumble's face, a mask of disbelief and humiliation, and the principal's stern, disappointed expression. But most vividly, he remembered the thunder of the motorcycles, Rex's unwavering gaze, and the profound sense that something undeniably right had occurred. It had been terrifying, truly terrifying, to approach those large, formidable men. His voice had quavered, his knees had threatened to buckle, and his mind had screamed at him to flee. Yet he hadn't. He had spoken his truth, a small, brave spark igniting a blaze of justice. A warmth spread through Leo's chest, a feeling he hadn't known before. It was pride, certainly, but more than that, a profound sense of agency. He, Leo, a second grader, had set this in motion. His courage had sparked a chain of events that exposed a bully and protected his friends. He had been the catalyst, the pebble dropped into the pond creating expansive ripples. He remembered the looks on his classmates' faces, the relief, the understanding, the sudden absence of their own fear when Mr. Grumbles was led away. He had done that for them, too. He saw Mrs. Davis, his homeroom teacher, discreetly wiping a tear as she spoke quietly with another teacher. Her gaze met his, and she offered a small, appreciative smile. It wasn't a smile of pity or comfort, but one of genuine respect. Leo felt himself stand a little taller. He had been right. Mr. Grumbles had been wrong. And the truth, once brought to light, possessed a powerful way of setting things straight. The school community, alive with whispers and wide-eyed astonishment, would never quite be the same. The saga of Mr. Grumbles and his pilfered colors would undoubtedly become a legend in the school halls, a cautionary tale whispered among students for years. The image of the Hells Angels, typically viewed with apprehension, had been transformed, at least in the minds of the children, into something akin to avenging angels. Though Leo understood they were just men deeply invested in their reputation and, surprisingly, in protecting kids from intimidation. The principal, having concluded her discussions, approached Leo. She knelt, her expression kind yet serious. "Leo," she said, her voice soft, "what you did today, it took incredible bravery. You stood up for what was right, and you helped us uncover a very serious problem." She paused, her gaze steady. "You're a very special boy, Leo." Leo nodded, a shy smile touching his lips. He needed no more words. The feeling within him, the quiet triumph, was enough. He had confronted his fear, articulated his truth, and witnessed justice unfold. The world felt a little safer, a little clearer. He had learned that even the smallest voice, when brave enough to speak, could move mountains. And as he walked out of the principal's office, the setting sun painting the hallway in hues of orange and gold, Leo knew, with absolute certainty, that he wasn't just a second grader anymore. He was brave, and he would never forget it.